Disclaimer: this video does not contain content that provides instruction on making or modifying 3D printed guns. This video is focused on the history of 3D printing firearms and the current law in California, as well as discussing some of the concerns people have with 3D printed firearms. This is for informational purpose only and does not promote or encourage illegal activity. Enjoy. Now, from the earliest days of firearms, people have been manufacturing their own, though back then it took the right person with the skills, tools, and knowledge to construct a functioning firearm. Today, with modern tools like CNC machines and 3D printers, creating a firearm at home has become something almost anyone can do, which is exactly what happened in May 2013. A man by the name of Cody Wilson designed the first widely available 3D printed single-shot handgun that ended up sparking a huge debate about the laws and regulations surrounding these homemade firearms. Now, I live in the state of California, and for me, it's interesting to learn the history and regulations that we currently have to understand how we got here. So without further ado, let's start from the beginning. So at the time when the Liberator was made, 3D printed firearms were still in the early stages of development, and there were no specific state laws in California addressing them. The Undetectable Firearms Act, however, was, which made it illegal to produce a firearm that couldn't be detected by metal detectors, but there were no specific state laws about 3D printed guns up until 2018 when California enacted Penal Code 29180 that went into effect January 1st. This law essentially made it so anyone manufacturing a firearm, including 3D printing, needed to apply for a unique serial number from the California Department of Justice before they could actually build the firearm. This serial number then needed to be permanently engraved onto a 3.7 ounce pH stainless steel. Fast forward to 2022, California expanded its regulations with AB 2156. This bill further tightened restriction on firearm manufacturing, targeting the use of 3D printing technology. Under AB 2156, the state required any person attempting to build a firearm, whether through traditional methods or 3D printing, to be licensed by the state as a firearm manufacturer. This bill also lowered the manufacturing threshold from 50 to just 4 firearms per year, which pretty much brings us up to current day California as far as I know. Now, over the years, many people have voiced their worries about 3D printing firearms and the potential risks they pose. These concerns have played a significant role in shaping the laws we currently see today, so let's talk about some of these issues. So one of the most common concerns lawmakers have had about 3D printed firearms is the potential to be undetectable through things like metal detectors, which created the fear of someone bringing a firearm into a secure location such as airports or government-run buildings without them being detected. Now, obviously, if you're someone who knows little about firearms, I can understand how this could be frightening, but if you know anything about firearms, you know that pulling the trigger sets off a chain reaction. The firing pin strikes the primer, detonating the gunpowder inside the casing. This explosion creates an intense pressure and heat, forcing the bullet down the barrel at high velocity. Given the amount of force involved, it is easy to see why plastic alone wouldn't be able to withstand that kind of pressure, especially over multiple rounds. This is why many 3D printed firearms still require metal components such as the barrel, slide, and receiver to ensure the gun can function safely and effectively for longer usage. Now, say firearms like the Liberator, for example, that are largely made up of plastic, understand that they still have metal parts like the firing pin and bullet, and sometimes screws keeping the whole thing together. So unless you're able to create something completely out of plastic, which at that point would just be a toy, there's no such thing as a Glock 7 that can go through metal detectors.
That punk pulled a Glock 7 on me. You know what that is? It's a porcelain gun made in Germany. Doesn't show up on your airport x-ray machines.
Next is the concern of 3D printed guns not being able to be traced, which is why they're often called ghost guns. Since they're made at home by individuals, they don't go through the same process as licensed manufacturers who are legally required to engrave serial numbers. Now, of course, in the state of California, it is now required to have a serial number, but the argument here was about 3D printed firearms illegally made and used in a crime, and how law enforcement wouldn't be able to trace it back to the original owner to identify a suspect. But here's the thing, even with serialized firearms bought from an FFL, that are used in a crime, that still doesn't guarantee you'll find the shooter. Why? Because guns used in crimes are often bought on the black market, where they're usually stolen from legal gun owners and then resold with a serial number scratched off, which ironically brings us back to the issue itself, an untraceable gun. Now, the next concern, I can honestly see where they're coming from. Look, I'm not so deep that I'm not able to understand the other side of the argument, which is unrestricted access, meaning any individual, including felons, could buy a 3D printer, download the files, and order the rest of the parts online and build a firearm without any sort of background check. Now, here's the thing. I haven't met anyone who doesn't agree violent criminals should not be allowed access to firearms. The problem is, how do you stop a criminal who doesn't abide by the law? Because technically, there's already laws in place that prohibit criminals and mentally unstable individuals from building and having access to firearms. Yet, even in states like California, which pretty much prohibits anyone from building a 3D printed firearm without a federal manufacturer license, criminals are still doing what they do best, which is breaking the law.
Are all ghost guns?
Everything here is a ghost gun.
Ironically, California has some of the strictest state gun laws in the U.S., and yet it's the epicenter of this growing problem.
So what's the solution to all this? Is it to require background checks in order to buy a 3D printer? I think that's what New York is currently working on if they haven't already implemented it. Or is it to just outright prohibit anyone from posting files on the web? Which gets into some serious issues with infringing on people's First and Second Amendment rights. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't really understand how prohibiting files on the web infringed on people's First Amendment. I mean, I understand the second, which we'll get into in a bit, but it was definitely interesting to learn how the First Amendment is involved in all this. Since I really don't know much about 3D printing, I didn't know that the files which are downloaded are essentially blueprints or instructions for creating a physical object. The files are then made up of code, which tell the 3D printer exactly how to construct the object layer by layer. Now, while the files themselves aren't speech in the traditional sense, they can be considered a form of expression under the First Amendment because they are in a way sharing information. Just like writing a book or creating a piece of art, 3D printing files communicate ideas and instructions. So when someone posts or shares these files online, it can be viewed as sharing information, and limiting access to information, like we saw during cough season, could be seen as a form of censorship and infringing on people's rights to exchange ideas or access to information. And of course, the most obvious, banning or restricting a person's ability to build their own firearm is an infringement on their Second Amendment rights. Now, while the Second Amendment doesn't specifically mention the act of building firearms, it does, however, protect the right to keep and bear these arms, which I'm glad the Founding Fathers were wise enough to not limit the Second Amendment to just muskets, like some people would like you to believe. Instead, they used the broader term arms, leaving it open to interpretation as technology evolved to include modern firearms like the AR-15, for example. And just as firearm technology has advanced, so has the ability to manufacture these firearms, whether through CNC machining, polymer casting, or 3D printing. At its core, the Second Amendment isn't about owning firearms. It's about ensuring people have the right to keep them so they can secure their own freedom from both foreign or domestic tyrannical government. Now, while I personally don't have an interest in 3D printing firearms and have limited experience shooting them, I think the only time I fired anything built was a P80, and to be honest, that was a complete piece of crap. I mean, the thing kept jamming and just felt really cheaply made. I guess later on I found out that P80s are only reliable as the person building them, so that explains a lot. So while I personally wouldn't trust a 3D printed firearm for self-defense, I do see the importance in letting people build them, and not just as hobbyists, but as a fundamental right protected by the Second Amendment that any free citizen in the United States should be able to exercise. So that's all I gotta say. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe. Also, while I don't train with 3D printed firearms, I do however train with trusted firearms from licensed manufacturers. So if that's something that interests you, make sure to check out my Instagram at Shadow the Wicked. Also, if you want to get in contact with me, that's a great place. But other than that, hope you guys have a good weekend. Stay safe and God bless.